All right, Sam, I'm stoked to have this conversation with you because we were chatting before this got started, but every time I've worked with you or I've seen you featured on something, it's always about, your knowledge, functional coaching. And so I think it'll be really cool to have this open dialogue about course build out and really taking $1 million idea and bringing it to life. And I know you do some business mentoring yourself, but I mean, do you ever find that some of the coaches you work with, they have a really hard time executing these big ideas?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you commented on something earlier that I think was really well put is just so many people think that in order to scale, they just like have to do business coaching, right? Or they have to do something like that. And the execution part is huge because some people are struggling even in like a one-to-one setting or a very like high intimacy format with execution. And I think the idea of having a course or having some sort of flagship offer becomes incredibly appealing. But if you haven't mastered certain points of execution and like customer activation within your business, you're going to really struggle regardless of the actual delivery mechanism of the offer or transformation. So it's something that behind the scenes I've really enjoyed learning about and also kind of retooling within our own business, but it's not something I get to talk about a ton. So when you sent over the idea for today's show, I was super excited because I know it's something we've both spent a lot of time on over the past few years, kind of taking an idea and then turning that into action or execution, like you mentioned, and then even being able to talk to other people who maybe have aspirations of building their own sort of flagship program course or kind of spin off on whatever their coaching method is.
Yep. And so, Sam and I are going to just have, like I said, an open chat and sharing two different perspectives, two different courses, right? So we're going to be talking about FNMS, we're going to be talking about Fitness Coach Academy, and just how we've both created these or taken $1 million ideas and turned them into really successful programs that have helped, hundreds, potentially thousands, right? And so I want to just ask you, what were you doing like when you created the idea for FNMS, right? Like what was going through your head? Obviously, you started out doing one-to-one coaching, but how did you come up with this course idea?
So I'll kind of rewind a little bit, probably to 5 years or so ago, maybe even a little bit more. Almost feel like that turned into a Will Smith when he's like doing the intro for Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where he's like, "There once was a story," like going all the way back. But what was interesting is in my one-on-one coaching journey, I actually had an increasing proportion or volume of people on my client roster who were actually health professionals, right? They were either nutrition coaches, fitness coaches, personal trainers, and they were mainly hiring me for either their own health issues, potentially, or maybe they didn't even have a health issue, but they wanted coaching. And then they'd sometimes ask me questions about their clients, right? So it was like, I knew that there was a need that I was serving and a problem that I was solving, but my offer was limited in its capacity to actually provide that mentorship that people were looking for. So one-on-one nutrition coaching kind of pivoted initially into mentorship. And then that mentorship pivoted into what amounted to be about a dozen people in this offer that I had created related to some of the core concepts that people would ask me about, whether that was thyroid health or low testosterone or women's reproductive health, PCOS, other sort of advanced cases that people would encounter. Because I noticed I was like, okay, wait, more than 50% of my client roster are like health professionals, but what I'm charging for here is like a coaching service of, doing your nutrition or training or something. But here on the other hand, most of the people are then leveraging that time to gather other information or resources that they're then using in their own business, right? So it's like I right now I'm selling B2C or business to consumer, but people are really desiring more of this like B2B interaction, right? Like actually helping them inside their business with their clients. So I wish I could say that I sort of just woke up one day and had this idea for what's now the functional nutrition and metabolism specialization inside of metabolism school, but I really didn't necessarily. It was more like like seeing the problem in the marketplace and what people were doing, looking at consumer behavior and how they were consuming my services really gave me a lot of insight into what was needed. And then in sort of getting to that place of an initial pilot or like beta round of the group or kind of running like an initial version or iteration, kind of plan A, I spent probably about a month just doing a lot of coaching and consulting calls where I would have coaches would call in with like their difficult client case or whatever they were stuck on or roadblock or obstacle. And I would essentially just help them. And a lot of those were free initially too, just to create one, kind of viability in the offer and understand that there was demand for it, and then also have a bit of social proof attached to it as well. So really the way the program has grown and to what it is today, it really started as just, a lot of times it's just like making a little bit of a productive pivot and then like a little bit of another pivot and then like fine tune and retool and optimize and kind of learn from your current experiences to be able to create like the ultimate offer that you have in the present moment. So for me, it really all started with coaching and then transitioned more into mentorship. And then it was like, okay, but there needs to be more to the offer here in order for it to be valuable and actually accomplish the transformation that I was accomplishing if I were working with someone one-on-one, right? So when you have that one-on-one coaching or mentorship with a coach, then when you begin to add more information or you begin to add more people to a group and you can't have that same hands-on like daily interaction, how do I still create this a similar quality of experience or transfer the same value or information in that condensed or collapsed time horizon? And that's really where, the whole magic of an offer is, right? Is like figuring out how to do that. And so that's kind of where I'd say probably 2018 to 2023, just a lot of my focus was just different iterations of that and fine tuning it and realizing problems within the offer that we had, or maybe pain points that we needed to solve, or what customers were looking for. Learning from our own mistakes, I think, can be huge. And then also seeing, I learned a lot from other industries as well too, and like kind of bringing that back into health and fitness. So that's really how it all started. There wasn't like a golden idea, but eventually kind of evolved into what I feel like is a pretty good one. And we've been able to leverage a lot of those past experiences in order to help coaches today.
One thing you mentioned that I want to bring up is the market research, because so many coaches either like don't understand what that truly means, or they just maybe try it, they put something out there, and then there's no bites the first time they try, and then they give up, right? And so I kind of want to swing this back, because you were saying there wasn't this like one magic idea. You just knew that your one-to-one coaching wasn't scalable how you wanted it to be, and you had something bigger there that you wanted to produce, right? Like mass produce. And so I like that you mentioned you started doing some one-to-one mentoring kind of in this space too, that was a little bit above your private coaching or like your one-to-one coaching, which is how mine started as well, right? And so for market research, if anyone's curious on how to start that, I did the same thing that you did. I remember just asking some questions on Instagram about like business stuff, just random basic things. Because after my business really started scaling the first year, just people were kind of sliding into my DMs. And so the idea wasn't, let me create a course. The idea was, let me see if I have something here, right? Because that imposter syndrome sometimes can kick in. And I mentioned that for coaches that are scaling, because I feel like, at least you can correct me, but every point of my scale, I've always been like, am I going to do this? Can I do this? Right. And you kind of like overcome that and keep going. But just getting people on a call with me totally for free, giving them a Starbucks gift card or whatever for their time, and then realizing, okay, my idea has been validated. I have something here. So I wanted to touch on that for a second, because I think a lot of coaches get to this point, and you can let me know what you think, but a coach will get to a point where they're like, all right, I've got 25 clients, man, I'm so wiped, I should create a course. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, when should
Yeah.
you think about that?
See, I don't know that there's necessarily a time. And see, the problem is there's this allure or appeal that people think a course is the answer. And most people's idea of a course is like a do-it-yourself offer, right? Like I record these modules and people are just going to pay me to like watch me talk. And even though I create free content on social media and I have a podcast and all these other things. And unfortunately, that's a little bit of a pipe dream. And a lot of the courses that Taylor and I are really talking about is there's still a level of support, intimacy, connection done with you, maybe not completely done for you, but there's components of the offer where there's still guidance and there's still a level of accountability to where, people know that you're actually in the program. The coach who has the 25 clients, I would say one of the best places to look for answers around your next offer would be your current and former customers. So I would say Taeler probably did a better job of being proactive and going on social media, polling people, asking questions, being in the DMs. Like, kudos to you for doing that. I think mine was a little more intrinsic in current client conversations. I'm sure there were totally some social media conversations that went down, just maybe not to the degree of like how you kind of curated some content and doing different things around fine tuning maybe what the audience needed. I was able to look at, okay, so if, let's say you have a few dozen clients or something, or even beyond that, and you have 10 to 12 people who are like really just vocal about these particular topics or vocal about these particular things they need help with. That was kind of a starting point. I also had a brief foray as a contract instructor for another certification and organization. So between having that experience, doing some instruction already for someone else who is trying to do some courses and certifications and things like that, and then also having this internal roster of clients who are kind of looking for more, wanting more, and then also even leveraging their current time with me, right? Like literally using the time that they paid for their own transformation to then try to help either their clients or answer questions that are common that pop up in the industry. I was like, okay, there's maybe something here. And then I think you mentioned like you did like Starbucks gift cards or have people get on the phone and just chat with them for free. My thing was kind of like, hey, bring whatever you're stuck with and, I will help you. And if I can like do you a solid and point you in the right direction, all I would ask is like down the road, like I may be creating something related to this. Like if you potentially consider supporting in some capacity, or if you can just, write a little blurb that like, hey, like Sam actually knows what he's doing. He's not like just trying to take your money or something like that. So there was definitely a phase, and it was just helpful for me to get an idea of like, okay, what common women's health themes were popping up, where do coaches hit roadblocks. It also allowed me to practice my teaching, because when you have to explain something like 20 different ways, you see, okay, it's stuck really well over here and this person's doing pretty good with it. When I explained it this way or tried to teach it this way, we didn't get a lot of traction. So the more you're working on going from like ideas to action and implementation and then trying to help other people do that, it's one thing to learn something, but then to teach someone else to actually, for them to learn it and then take action on it, is like a whole nother level of mastery. And so it was just a really interesting process for me of going from like, okay, this internal client focus, having mastery over the topic myself, to then figuring out like, how do I get someone else to this point where they feel more confident in the topic or actually have a handle on what they're doing. So I would say we had similar approach in the questions, in the dialogue, in the getting into conversation, customer research or market research. But really at the end of the day, it's just having conversations with people, understanding what problems are present in the marketplace or like for those people. Do I realistically have an opportunity or a chance to solve those problems, or do I have something that I offer that's unique that I can propose or make available in a certain way that remedies whatever they're struggling with, whatever that obstacle is or challenge? And so to kind of tie it back to the original portion of your question with the coach who has those 25 clients, it's like, is there any demand for this on your current client roster? That's really question number one. Question number two is, do you have 5 or 10 really successful transformations where there were certain things that happened with those people, certain activation points, certain types of communication, certain types of information that were shared? Was there a certain cadence that you interacted with these people? Did they get involved in the community with other clients or other team members? Because success leaves clues, right? And so we need to go back and almost reverse engineer some of our best client cases. And then also, this part sucks, but you probably need to go and look at like 2 or 3 examples of where people did not succeed within your coaching offer or your coaching business. And you're not going to actually go in with the glasses of like blaming them. You're going to look at it with a fine tooth comb of like, where did I potentially either let this person down, or how can I make this better? And if you can learn from like, it feels good to look at like the 5 or 10 best cases. Some of those people might have been successful anyways because it's the type of person that they are. But look at multiple different cases and viewpoints, and then also go on the complete other side of things and be like, okay, these 2 or 3 people didn't have the same experience. Why was it? And maybe it was partially them, but I also have to take responsibility as a business owner that some of it was me. And then between those two data points or like data sets that you're going to have from those individuals, you can begin to identify like themes that are very important related to the transformation that you offer in the coaching journey or customer journey. And you can begin to kind of figure out like, what would this look like if it were in the form of an offer or the form of a course? And that can be kind of a launching off point, because too many people are worrying about like copying someone else's course or trying to duplicate something someone else has or going into business coaching. And I'm like, well, what if you just created an offer specific to you that was like your flagship program based on the previous transformations you've provided that you've already proven that you're an expert in? Like, wouldn't that be such an easy pivot for you to make and also scale your time and do those things? But people don't necessarily do that. I'm not 100% sure why. I think some of these other aspects are kind of glamorized maybe, but I think that's the low hanging fruit for a lot of coaches. Once they hit a few dozen clients, or maybe you're at a point where it's like, cool, you're awesome at stacking marketing and sales and you're at like 40 or 50 clients, but now you're like, okay, how do I get my time back? Other than hiring an assistant coach and dealing with some of the turnover that can happen as far as like scaling a team there. So that's where I tend to direct people, regardless of whether they want to build a course or not, is like getting conversation with some of your raving fans and the clients you have. And then let's also look at some places where people maybe fell through the cracks.
So I just want to kind of reiterate that I know you've mentioned this already, but Sam and I are really talking about courses that are not totally passive. Like that's not what we're talking about creating. Like, and we're going to go into course curriculum now and kind of the build out of that. And I'm sure that we will both give, different opinions on this or different perspectives for sure. But, going back to the curriculum and going back to the coaching methods you have, I hear a lot of coaches say, every client's totally different. Like I have no idea. No, try to look at it from a different perspective. Like there are certain things that you do over and over again, right? And if you don't look at every client as a total outlier, right? There are definitely methods that you practice with every client. There's a certain way that you kick it off. There's a certain way that you get through this problem or this problem, whatever it is, right? And that's kind of how, I created FCA for an example, and like a very, very elementary way to explain it, after I had, I don't even remember how many transformations of getting to the same point, I realized there was this need out there for beginner coaches to hit a 5K month. All I saw out there was like 0 to 10, 0 to 10, 0 to 10. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I can focus on this smaller aspect and get them to put their 2 weeks notice in. That was my experience, right? So I focused on that. But more importantly, I remember being so nervous to even do this mentoring with coaches because I, was like, well, I'm throwing it out there. Let's see what happens. I wasn't charging much at all. And I noticed that every single client went through pretty much the same things over and over again. And I was having to, like you said, practice different ways of coaching people through things, right? So when I sat down to build curriculum, it was really in front of me the entire time, but I hadn't articulated that. I'm curious to know kind of your thoughts on building that curriculum. And like you said, don't focus on making it perfect the first time, because I know you and I have made so many updates and continue to make updates, but that's for later in this podcast. But, your thought on just building that unique coaching framework.
Yeah, and how you'll teach over time will change, because ideally with the reps of explaining things, you get better and more efficient at doing it. And you also have a larger sample size of audience to work those ideas. I was pretty fortunate that a couple things that I shared in free content really landed with people. So it was more about adding depth and a level of, I guess, specificity to things that you couldn't fit in like a 2,200 word Instagram caption. So some of the things dating back to like 2018, 2019, I tried to create like a kind of book of sorts or outline that would like accompany the mentorship and course experience that I kind of built out. And so in that, and trying to frame my ideas and explain like why things happen the way that they do, I kind of landed on a few different methods and models. But I think one thing you explained very well, Taeler, is like clients may have individual, maybe someone's weight loss and someone's muscle building, or someone needs to work on their gut health or whatever. We've got like a lot of different directions that we may be pulled as coaches. But what I try to draw from would be the parallels in like how we think about problems, how we approach the customer experience, or certain stages or phases that we may have. Because even if they don't go in the same order every time, maybe you just know that you have a phase where you're like focused on a client's health versus focused on fat loss, right? Or maybe you know that with every client, there's like an assessment portion of something you do, whether it's reviewing their intake form or you hop on a quick phone call. There's probably something you're doing to review their life to get the information you need. It doesn't matter if they don't have the same macros. It doesn't matter if one person needs to eliminate gluten and dairy and someone else doesn't, or if someone's training 5 days a week and someone's training 3 days a week. It's really not about that. I think coaches get very in the weeds. It's more your methodology or thought process and how you're sort of engineering that transformation. And so with what I teach, I find that it's a little more important to bring people not only the actual science of what's going on, but helping people think about the science of what's going on or how they should think about a problem. Because some of the coaches that have had the greatest success in coming out of our current curriculum, it's really more about they're able to critically think, they're able to look at different parallels between clients, they're able to learn from different things, they're able to apply information from different areas. And I think that makes them more successful. So I really think it's more about how can you help someone understand your thought process for solving a problem, or how can you help someone understand the steps by which you may go about things, even if there's little mini steps within that or little points that are going to be tweaked, right? Maybe Sally needs to be in a calorie deficit, but Jane does not need to be in a calorie deficit. That's okay. But when you are onboarding them, maybe there are some parallels between the two. Or for me, like an FNMS, using an example inside of science, I think it's important before you dive into reproductive health or adrenals or PCOS or a number of different things that we just talk about kind of a 10,000-foot view of like metabolism or a 10,000-foot view of adaptive physiology. Why does the body change the way that it changes? What type of stimulus is the body sensitive to, whether it's food or stress or a number of other different things, right? So once we have this path or like sort of roadmap to follow, you can then begin to stack things on top of that and then have the individualization in there too. So there's certainly a way to do it. And also you could think about maybe even if you're providing, let's say you're providing a customized nutrition plan and training program, and you're really a firm believer in individualization versus cookie cutter, which I totally am. I know Taylor's a big proponent of that. But what might be some themes? Does everybody need to learn about a food log? Does everybody need to learn about stress management? Is sleep important to everyone? Is recovery important to everyone? Even if they're training a different amount during the week, recovery is still important, sleep's still important, stress management is important. So you could create pillars or foundational principles that you believe in that drive results for your clients, even if their actual execution differs. Maybe someone's doing time restricted eating, someone's not. Maybe someone's on an elimination diet, someone else isn't. And that's okay. It's more about, okay, but both of those individuals still need some of the things we just talked about. They still need to prioritize their sleep and get into a good nighttime routine, or maybe they need stress management, or they need help with their time management. So you're going to find core considerations and struggles that your clients have, even if they have ever so slightly different goals or ever so slightly different health histories. And then you can really work to engineer what that path looks like, and maybe even providing a little bit of coaching along the way as like a hybrid portion, along with the course material, right? Along with those pillars that you're sharing.
Well, and it takes repetition, right? And that's kind of, what I want to keep getting back into is everything that we're talking about, whether it's the course build out, the curriculum design, the just advancing it as it scales, right? Like it all takes repetition. And so if you've had 5 clients and that's your lifetime, that's it, right? It's going to be hard to think of a course build out. But I just want to ask you, I know you're always updating it, but like, when you were like, all right, I'm going to create this course, just curious, how long did it take you to like build out the curriculum before you launched it the first time? Ish.
I mean, definitely no more than 12 weeks, but I'm probably not the best example of this, because I also tend to do better if I have an idea and I start acting on it and I sort of build things. I'm not saying for everyone that you need to like assemble your parachute as you jump out of the plane, but there is a level of sense of urgency and also just getting sort of test flights under your belt that I think is super important. So the first time I taught it, because I was doing a lot of one-on-ones, it allowed me to already have some sample data to play with. I think when we went through, thinking back, it was like Q1 or Q2 years and years and years ago. I want to say most of it was completed in like a 12-week time horizon, maybe. Whereas the original, when I was doing it with like one person at a time or a very, very small group, would have been closer to like, okay, maybe we covered stuff in like 8 weeks. So there are things that changed over time as I built it, but I'm the the way that I like to kind of learn, map things, teach things, and go is create outlines and then fill in maybe some talking points that I really want to focus on, and then maybe find supporting data or client examples or different things that I'm going to teach, and kind of go from there. So it's definitely been a while since like the first flight, but I think if there's anything that I could provide some encouragement on or share with you guys is sometimes you do have to sort of jump into it. I would say an outline is very smart, and not everybody works well under pressure. So if you're that person, pre-record some modules, pre-record some teachings, get some stuff on paper. But I do think the perfectionist mentality can hurt you a little bit if you don't allow yourself to just immerse yourself in the actual, whether it's teaching or coaching or whatever it is you're trying to do. You actually need to do the thing, versus just having this idea on paper. So there was definitely a period of time where I documented some of those key conversations. I know for a fact, I vividly remember, like whether it was Apple Notes or a Google Doc, like making a very solid outline, then filling in that outline with some of my favorite teaching points and examples, and maybe some case studies, FAQs that would come up for each section, and going over like almost like a mock Q&A based on past conversations that I'd had. And then from there, that allowed me to have sort of a minimum viable thing that I could do. And then just from there, how can you fill it in to make it as robust as you can with the past customer experiences you've had? And that's where talking to people can be super helpful and iterating off of that. And then once I did it, the first couple times, I think it was probably after 2 or 3 sort of run throughs where I just went and did like a complete overhaul. And I was like, okay, I learned enough from these experiences to then there have been a few key milestones, probably partially also when like the world shut down. I had a lot of time on my hands to like go in and completely reboot a lot of this stuff. So 2020, I made a ton of changes. 2022, there were a lot of change. Late 2021 into 2022, there were a lot of changes. Then as like a midpoint in 2022, I like retooled some more things in terms of customer journey. And the more people that you've run through things and the greater volume you have, you then can begin to make more strategic decisions, I think, even on maybe more of like a quarterly or annual basis. Whereas the first couple times I was doing it, there weren't necessarily enough people, or you didn't have as big of a sample size to be able to like have the rationale to then go pursue this like different avenue or direction that you wanted to do. So long story short, I would say I strongly recommend like a very solid outline with your key talking points or any research you need to do, any client examples or stories or important things you want to tell or share, any key graphics or things you want to do. But beyond that, I do think you need to kind of submerge into the content and actually just start engaging with your customers. And then go back and then make it better, right? Just improve from everything that you've learned in that first couple run throughs. And if I had to do it again, I probably would have done it a little sooner after the first 1 or 2, and then just kind of continue to make it like a quarterly or annual thing. Because I think you can change it too often, where it's like if you don't give yourself enough time, then you don't know what works. And if you change it too frequently, that's a problem. But if you don't change it frequently enough, you're potentially missing out on valuable feedback in learning from the customers that you do have to improve the experience for the future people going through the program. So it's a balance, I think. What about you? Like, how did you approach that in terms of when you were doing things more on the business side, kind of going from coaching, and then you had these ideas, you did the market research? What did that curriculum sort of revision process, or were you the type that like you put the offer out there and then you built it? Or was it more like you had this master perfectionist plan of like all your slides were done and you're like good to go?
So I'm definitely a messy action person. It's funny, as much of a perfectionist as I am, I'm not in business, which is like, I don't know if that's so weird. Like I am with my fitness and my like personal life and whatever. But I'm not with business because I just understand that things happen so quickly. And in order to get the data that you need, right, you have to like get something out there. That doesn't mean it's not going to be my best effort, but it's never going to feel totally perfect. So the way that FCA went, I kind of had like an 8-month time frame from idea inception to like the day that my clients started. I remember, my first launch with it was about, I think it was 6 weeks long. And I'm known for doing 6 to 8 week launches, and we can kind of talk about launch timeline in a minute, because I know that's pretty long for some people, but I remember first just thinking, okay, let me articulate and get down on paper exactly what the big ideas were, creating an outline just like you did, and then started filling in the gaps. And then I was like, all right, how long is this going to be? What's the idea? And you had something that sounded just like what I did. You know, my mentoring for private coaching was about 4 months. Some of them would resign, but generally speaking, I designed like a 4 month time frame. That's kind of how I came up with it. I was like, what needs to be a module? What's kind of a, you know, an extra video here and there. And then I knew that there were a lot of other competitors out there for me. And so one thing that I would encourage you to do is just see who is a competitor of yours, right? Because it's not about copying or any of that, but I think you need to know what you're up against, right? Like what is different about what you have to offer? Because I get that question with FCA all the time, right? Somebody's coming to me, they've had 7 conversations with other business coaches. Like, what is it that's different about what I'm doing? And so I knew that I wanted number one, like I still am a fitness coach today. My roster is not nearly as big, of course, but you know, I find that knowledge very valuable, which is why I made sure people like yourself were in there, even if it was just for like one training or something. But I started basically outlining it, and then I went through, and this was like my favorite thing that I did. But I would kind of highlight red, yellow, or green what I was super confident talking about, what I was like maybe like freshen this up a little bit, and then what did I want to outsource. Right. I think people forget that they can bring other experts in. And, you know, this didn't end up being like modules were taught by other coaches. It was more of like the advanced training vault that I have, right? Again, bringing you in. This was 2+ years ago. And so I didn't know anything really, or not nearly as much about like hormones as I do today. And so, you know, there were little things that I wanted to outsource without making FCA like a 50-50 split. I mean, it's really an 85% business coaching course, 15% fitness coaching. But essentially I designed absolutely everything, created the resources, all of that, probably in about 4 months, like you did. And then I think the hardest part though was designing like the sales page and the marketing stuff. Like, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think people really underestimate, like they're sitting on this gold mine of information and then they don't know how to market themselves. Like that's what I see happen all the time. Every one of my clients is so freaking smart. And then when it comes time to actually sell something, that's where I see the ball drop. And so I'm curious to know for you, um, how were you able to manage like the launch? What did your launch cycle look like?
Yeah. So fortunately with those initial groups, because they were smaller and I already had some coaches that had signed up for like a fitness transformation that actually needed mentorship, I could reach back into that pool of individuals. And then I also had some goodwill from all of those case study calls that I did. I mean, because it was literally like a month, maybe 2. This was in probably like November, December one year. I just did so many of those one-on-ones that it really did build, I think, some brand equity for me that was super helpful. I had also around that time really made like a pretty significant podcast tour. So even though, and I didn't really pitch the offer on those podcasts, but it helped me build audience and tension in terms of what I actually wanted to do. I think your 4 month timeline is pretty generous. I think if we're both somewhat messy action takers, it would be super generous to say that I had like 4 months of stuff into my actual the delivery, right? The course. And I think now there's been a lot more fine tuning of that and realizing I look back and I'm like, dude, there's so much that you could do here. Like you've got a lot of great ideas, but we really need to build this out in the delivery of those ideas. And so transitioning to the marketing strategies, expectations, and just kind of, you even mentioned your launch timeline, which I think is super fascinating in terms of length and everything there. But initially, the marketing was easy. And I think when you have a warm audience, you've had people who followed you for a while and you have something new, you're going to have early adopters that want to be involved and want to be part of it. And they are a fan of your brand and they want the different thing that no one's had before. It's like when the new car comes out or the new, whatever it is, or new, there's something new at your favorite like fitness apparel and you grab it. There's a level of like a percentage of your audience that's going to fall into that category. And so the first couple times I was running the program, I was very fortunate that I had a lot of that like fresh organic audience and also these people pouring in from different podcasts. Had also had the teaching experience from a external organization and was doing some seminars that year. And I wish I could say that all of that was done very strategically, but it was more of a very nice, like perfect storm of podcasts, seminars, the in-person speaking combined with a pretty substantial roster of past folks who maybe signed up for an offer that wasn't perfect for them, but allowed them to be the early adopters in the coaching offer, the B2B offer that actually was for them, which was like the early origins of FNMS. From a marketing perspective, I kind of remember building like that first sales page and actually, even seeking out additional education and even I guess you could sort of call it mentorship or books and reading about even writing copy because it wasn't something that I was like super proficient at that point. So from a marketing strategies perspective, I was super green in that area. And I think I was very fortunate that there was demand for the thing that I wanted and that I had social proof. If it were not for social proof and really trying to build social proof and audience and having people who want to kind of come into the program, I think it would have been a lot harder. And earlier, so it was probably around 2018 was big in the fall because I had like a T Nation article go up. I spoke at LinkedIn for the first time at the Empire State Building in New York. So I had those things kind of swirling on my social media where it was like, okay, like maybe this guy's actually like kind of legit. And so I had these people who were in my ecosystem where before they weren't buying from me, right? They were like, I'm interested in this guy. I'm going to steal his free content. I like him. I'm going to follow him, but I'm not going to pay for anything. And then all of a sudden it's like, as other parties begin to see that you're legit, it's like they latch on. So you have your early adopters. And then by like the second or third round, I hit a point where the other efforts I had related to my brand compounded as like an effective marketing strategy to then pull people in. So I didn't have like the perfect sales. I had a sales page, certainly wasn't perfect. The copy could have been better. The things I think I did well were more along the lines of brand building and strong social proof related to videos and testimonials from coaches, as well as my own bank of client testimonials of people that I had served in their transformation. So if I had like a good, bad, ugly, it would be like the good was building brand. I think the writing on the page was probably okay. It was not like the best, but it was okay. A lot of the social proof aspects that were out there that went into building brand, I think were really helpful. And then the new organic social media audience funneling from social and podcasts was probably pretty helpful as well. The things I was not very good at was like learning how to do, email launch, the sales page and like the tech that goes into the integration of like email and actual sales page. Those are the things from a marketing strategy perspective where I think I've grown a lot over the last 5 or 10 years, but that was definitely more of a weak point. But you can start with something as simple as like, you can have a very basic sales page, or I've even seen people do really amazing things with a Google Doc and then have a solid type form and do really well on your sales calls, right? It's like sometimes we make the mountain bigger than it needs to be. But I would say from a marketing strategies perspective, like kind of good and bad, that's kind of how I would lay things out as far as things I was doing well at that point in my career versus like, okay, this needs work and you're going to continue to need to grow in that area.
I will say that we definitely like differ on a lot of those points, but not anything that I don't agree with. It's just like that wasn't the landscape for me. So when I was creating FCA, like I had built this business on fitness coaching, right? So my audience wasn't warm. I didn't have coaches following me, not many. So that's why for me, this is when I really solidified my outbound sales strategy, right? I didn't really know what the hell I was doing, but my ass was in the DMs hours a day, right? And I was like, I'm just going to find people to ingest my content. And I remember making like this really hard pivot. And instead of having 100% fitness content, I pretty much went, all right, I'm never writing another fitness caption again. I've got 3 years of, banked content. It's going straight business, right? And so I remember, and I've told this to my clients before, but I remember pitching my offer just for private coaching, not FCA, but pitching private coaching for 90 days straight before anyone ever bought anything from me. Whereas like fitness coaching came very easy because I had been documenting my health journey since 2012. So people kind of started following me from that. Right.
Right.
So FCA was a little bit different. Like the sales page was very important, right? Like the videos, the Loom videos, things like that were super important for me to create. And so it's interesting to hear your perspective because you're saying, well, I had, these speaking engagements or these in-person things that were happening. I agree with you on the podcast because I'm so happy that I started my podcast in,
So this was actually being a guest on others. And I would agree with you. Like sales pages are super, super, super important. And when I said social proof, I meant like stuff I could put on the sales page. So I think we agree on the sales page component. I would say I was at a very unique crossroads that a lot of people listening to this may not have sort of this vortex of like things in your career come together the way that they did at that point in time. So what I would extract more from the story that parallels Taeler as like a key point of emphasis would be, you know, so for her, she mentioned the Loom videos and like having a strong sales page, but all of that is just like compelling evidence that your offer could work for someone, right? And so I use social proof for that. Maybe she's using a different, like other ways to come about at that same point of like getting someone to convert. And the connection she created through DM and outbound, I had some of that through phone calls and doing the open sort of office hours idea that I had, and then past clients who I had a relationship with. So the parallel, as much as we may be saying different things to kind of extract this for the listener, the parallel is like connection with audience, regardless of where they're sort of coming from. Taeler cultivated hers. And then I think from that sales and marketing strategy perspective, one of the common themes is, she found that it was very important to begin sort of pouring into copy and captions and like creating things that were, moving away from the fitness offer. And I was pretty similar. We both probably went through that phase of like, wow, I've been talking about my transformation or my client's transformation for a long time. I've got to talk about this other thing. And that can be a big shift. I think one thing I will say that probably did work to your advantage to an extent is I remember, because before that you were a reporter, or like a news caster, and like had the media avenue running for you, and you were in your transformation. And so when that was more of a side hustle for you, I think even prior to that, you had been creating content even before you were probably pitching super hard. So before it was your full-time job, Taeler had banked years of probably like content creation, sharing her journey, and her pitch, like her share to pitch ratio was probably pretty low compared to a full-time fitness coach, right? Like the amount of value that she added, like this is goes back to like 3 Gary Vee books ago, but the idea of like jab, 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 right hook, or give, 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 ask. Taeler was giving a lot more, like her ratio of give to ask was pretty solid. The parallel in my journey was more so I was able to add value to those coaches, solve their problems. And then when I did have something to ask, I had established, there was some content around helping people, and I had already sort of built that brand equity or some goodwill. So Taeler had done that, I think, probably before you even came up with the business offer, because I think you had that other experience. Your Instagram was really like education and entertainment, and your just personal story for like a pretty decent chunk of your career, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I started my Instagram in 2012. I was laid off from my TV job in 2019 and started my business, immediately, right? And so I just, I had no job. I was like, crap, I'm living in Cleveland and I've been here for a year. What the hell am I going to do? Right. So yeah, I went straight in for fitness coaching, and because I had built so much rapport and education and inspiration and all of those good things, not intending to, right? Instagram was kind of my outlet. And I had people that were coming from, work or the cycling studio I was at, or just random people from high school that have been following me that were like, hey, I want to hire you. Right. And so that didn't last for that long. Right. Ultimately, I would say I got my first like 10 to 20 clients pretty quickly. Right. With, not a ton of outreach, but then pivoting over to like the business coaching, that definitely is where I realized, okay, I don't have much traction because people saw what I had built. Like I talked about getting laid off. I talked about all of that. Like people saw that transformation, but I didn't ever really have a super warm audience. So for me, it was this constant cycle of outreach, get them warm, sell, outreach, get them warm, sell, right? And so that's kind of how it was for me. But I will say, yes, my journalism career 1000% makes content very easy for me. That's like a big
Well,
priority for
I meant more like So a lot of people are like, may hear the thing of when you got laid off and you got those 10 to 20 clients, people think of that as an overnight success. But what I'm trying to point to is you still put in time documenting your journey and sharing
Oh, for
content.
sure.
So
Yeah.
your content creator background could be leveraged to some of the success you have
Yeah.
today. And as much as you did need to pivot and you changed your strategies for growing the business, what I was maybe pointing out to someone who's in the infancy of their journey is like, Taeler still banked some hours, some time, some years as far as sharing, documenting, being a content creator, contributing to her audience, educating that audience, entertaining that audience, sharing her journey, like maybe having some vulnerable spots of like things that she was experiencing. And then when the business stuff came, like you had to get resourceful and learn some new skills. But I still think it's important. That's why it's just like important for coaches listening to this, or maybe more in that beginner phase. It's like you got to start posting, you got to start talking to people, you got to start sharing stuff, you got to put yourself out there. Is really more what I was speaking to. I think your pivot definitely makes sense given your audience was more of a fitness uh, sort of people who are gravitating towards your fitness content more than the business content. So you had to cultivate the warm audience, which totally makes sense.
Yeah. And I'll kind of add one more note on like my first few dozen clients, or I'll say first dozen, because to be honest, I don't really remember exactly. I do remember my first like 8 to 10 clients were living in the same city as me. And one thing that I always tell my coaches who are totally new is, I would not stop talking about what I was doing. The second that I knew I was leaving TV, and they gave me like a 4-week notice. It was like, okay, I have 4 weeks to try and figure something out. I mean, it wasn't like a post on my story and people came. It was really like, hey, I know you have this photo shoot coming up. Hey, you have this wedding coming up. Hey, you know what I mean? And kind of like offering my friends some like low prices to just get them on my roster to try and build some rapport. But I think that that's whether we're talking about a course or your first client, I see that there's a lot of this like grit missing, right? Like this idea that, they may see somebody like you and they're looking at what you've built and it's taken you, I don't even know how many years, but a long time, right? To
I think
get,
I'm older than you.
yeah. So, I mean, I just want to make sure like neither of us were overnight successes. Like
Yeah.
Sam and I have put in so many reps and so many years to get here. And we've heard no probably a million times, right? And you mentioned one thing that was really helpful, but like I always say that the best trait for an entrepreneur is curiosity, right? And like constantly staying curious. You mentioned earlier, about I think it was like when you were talking about finding resources for a sales page or referencing other industries for what you were doing, right? Like there's not literature on the fitness coaching industry really. Like if you're trying to learn business techniques and tactics, right? I think it's so important to get curious and just start like diving into some rabbit holes, like it's not just what your coach tells you, what your mentor tells you. Like you have to go outsource this knowledge on your own and get curious about what's out there, how to solve your problem in a better capacity. But yeah, so I'm with you on everything that you said for sure. I'm curious to know the time frame between like how many rounds of live FNMS did you do before taking it evergreen?
I can try to give you a rough ballpark. I'm trying to do math in my head really quick. Probably no less than 5 to 7.
Wow. Okay. I only did 2.
Okay. I probably, technically it wasn't FNMS yet. So if we go through, probably had a couple years that were more the mentorship saga, move more into, I actually called it, there were a couple rounds, it was applied science methods mentorship, kind of came up with the FNMS idea. FNMS itself would have been three cohorts. So if you did 2, it would have been FNMS would have been 3. So it's like coming from that perspective of once the offer was actually created, because we ended up going fully evergreen after essentially some of those larger intakes where I was like, okay, maybe we don't have to only rely on launch and cohort based, on more of like a quarterly to, I think we were doing intakes about 3 times a year. And then from 3 times a year, rather than just doing quarterly launches, it was like, let's just go evergreen. Because when we got to the point where it was like we could launch every quarter, it's like, why don't we just instead take people all the time and then figure out how to actually change the customer experience to be able to handle that and be able to provide a similar experience.
So just in case somebody's listening and they're like, what the hell is evergreen, right? Evergreen is you can apply, you can join anytime, whereas live is like a hard start, hard stop. And I remember, I did 3 launches, live launches in my first year of dropping FCA. But by the 3rd launch cycle, I knew that that was my last live launch for it. And I was going to take it evergreen. So, my process, and I'll explain it pretty quickly, was, because people always ask me, why would I go live when I could just make it evergreen? And in my opinion, and you may have a different thought process, other than just the obvious of going through it and making sure it makes sense, right? I think that there needs to be, it's just easier to create hype, right? If you come out with something brand new and it's like you can start anytime and there's no authority around the offer, I think you're setting yourself up for a really shitty launch.
Yeah, and the rapport that's built between people who are starting at the same time. So as much as I think we were able to figure out the marketing aspect a little bit faster, and then what we had to really dive in on was more figuring out a way to support our clients at the same level when they all weren't going through the same content at the exact same time. And we're kind of a modified evergreen in that I try to make it where it's still, because there's limited availability and it's a classroom size and it's a little bit more advanced material, we still have to have sort of a first come first serve. Like as people finish, we can take people on. So there's still a little bit of a limited cap on the front end, but then on the back end, as far as people completing it and staying with us, that's more evergreen. So I moved to kind of like a hybrid model on the front, and it still was largely based on kind of availability. And then we would still push enrollments and do enrollment waves or intakes around that, and then allow people to kind of stay depending on their preference and what they actually needed. And then as we rolled out expansions to the curriculum, we would allow people to opt, our current customers, to stay if they wanted to learn from that expanded content. So I would say I agree with you 100% that if you do not have social proof and authority for that offer yet, doing it like evergreen or continuously does not make sense. I also think it's a disservice to your initial customers and community who could benefit from the shared experience of other customers and community members. Because the first couple times, you're not going to be 100% like perfect at what you're doing yet. After a few times, you're going to get better and better and better, and you're going to be better at teaching. You're going to be better at providing an experience. You're going to be better at supporting your clients. You're going to be better at having support staff or hiring the right people. But until you get there, the community helps you. Like you're going to go 80, and like the last like 10 to 20 is going to be like the community has to carry some of that for you. And also having the cohort based aspect of people matriculating through, I think, can really help your success rates. When you go evergreen, that gets a little harder, and you need to reverse engineer how to create a similar experience even with people starting at different times. So that would be where I definitely agree with Taylor on, like, you're doing yourself a disservice from a marketing and sales perspective if you're just instantly trying to open it to where, oh, I can take people all the time. And there's even probably benefit to like having certain collapsed intake windows like for other components of business as well. But that's something where I think we're pretty similar in that sense, and why, I didn't make the shift initially. I think you got to build some reps there in terms of the value you're providing for your people, and also your ability to, if you open Evergreen the first time, it's like you don't even know how to get people into the program yet, and you're saying people can join at any time. So I think you got to master that first before you sort of pivot there.
So yeah, and the thing with live launches, and I've got podcasts on that, so I'm not even going to really dive into all of like the launch style and strategy, but I just wanted to really put that out there because I'll have a coach who has a great idea and they want to just put out a passive course and throw it away and that's it. And so similar to you, like we also have a cap, right? And not on the back end because we do have support as well, like alumni support. But I think as long as you are creating an environment where you are accessible, because that was really important to me, was that when these coaches joined this beginner level coaching container, they get access to me every single day. Like that's very, very important to me. And so even though our capacity is significantly higher than it was years ago, right? There still is a reasonable number of people that we can take on and make sure that they are kicking ass, right? I never want this course to be something, and same with you, where somebody comes through and is like, the hell is that? Like, I paid all this money and I didn't get anything from it. So my next question, and the conversation I want to kind of move into, is, these support roles, right? Whatever you want to call them. I really hate the term support coaches. It's not my favorite terminology because it has such a bad rap, out there. But it took me years before I ever introduced some kind of additional coaching support in my container. So I'm curious to know, was it like an inbound thing? Did you put an application out? How did you find that support, and what was that role technically, or is that?
So probably had two roles kind of came together at the same time. One was more operations related and just helping in terms of fulfillment, more on the logistics side of people enrolling and being able to handle that. As far as instruction, because what was taught inside of the nutrition and metabolism specialization is inherently specialized, as the name implies, that was a little bit harder. And fortunately, I found someone who had actually reached out to me for advice on his coaching and everything he was going through. And we had a really good conversation around, hey, like, are you someone who really wants to kind of build your own thing, or are you just really passionate about these topics and you want to be a part of a team and something bigger than yourself and like help grow that? Do you find yourself being kind of that complementary piece, or is it really, really important to you to kind of be like number one center of attention? Like, you've got to be the person. And some people don't want to be that person, or they don't want the pressure or the risk associated with it. And I was like, you don't have to tell me right now. I was like, think about it. I was like, I don't want an answer right now. Go like reflect on this, go, be in your business, do what you want to do. And then we also just talked about the person's current life and what would be worth it to them to be a part of it, which for some people, if you're listening to this, you may have someone who follows you, who believes in your work or wants to learn from you, wants to be a part of what you're doing. And maybe they just have a part-time job that they don't like. And if you can replace that part-time job and they can work for you and then do their other thing, that's great. Or maybe they're trying to get out of their full-time job or transition careers, or they want to be more involved in coaching. So I was fortunate to find someone who was very passionate about the material, really didn't love the marketing and social media requirements involved in like building a brand. But because they loved the material so much, they wanted to be heavily involved, but was also in a crossroads from a life perspective where it was very important to them to get a little bit of time back and move away from a job that they had. And so my offer was essentially, hey, I'll get you away from the thing that you hate. You can do the topics that you love, and you don't need to be like the person who's going out there all the time to find the clients. And they're like, okay, cool, I'll do that. So my first core people were really a combinations of like excuse me, of like the education fulfillment aspect, and then more of the logistics and operations and systems side of fulfillment. And one was more referral based, and the other was just based on an organic conversation that I had, because it was like we were DMing, and I don't think I even realized the person's potential 100% at first because of how the conversation was going. And then I started doing some digging, like just kind of wandering around between their profiles, some past client stuff, and like kind of just doing some internet wandering. And I was like, oh, this dude's pretty good. Like, he actually knows what he's talking about. And then I kind of circled back and I was like, hey, do you want to like, we should chat. Like, let's actually like connect a little bit further outside of this conversation. And I always felt like I could create a win-win. And so if you are looking for a support person, which that's not necessarily what we call folks inside of our organization, but whether you're looking for help and it's more operational, or you need someone to help you with the education, fulfillment, or coordination of what your clients are actually doing, sometimes it's just about finding the win-win for that person and what it is that they're looking for at the stage of their life, and what would be of value to them, and then figuring out, how do I provide that value through this offer, and is it something that they're passionate about and like want to be a part of. So I actually haven't had a ton of success with like just only the application aspect, but that was also, this was years ago, a couple years ago at this point. Hadn't had as much. Podcast was kind of earlier on. That started in 2019. And then also I've grown my social media as well. So who knows, like I don't know, maybe if I posted something now, there'd be like a very different response. But these came up a little bit more organically, which I can appreciate.
Yeah, I think, there can be a mix of this, and mine was also organic, and it's also been a role, somebody fulfilling a role in my business where I just saw potential for that role to keep increasing, right? So I agree with you there. Some of it has been from clients expressing, the need, and not every one of those has necessarily worked out. But if a client is like, man, I wish I was on your team, or that's a goal for me, and I know they're kind of a rock star client, then we might have that conversation depending on what I'm needing. But I also just want to add this, like, don't be afraid to do the old fashioned job posting on, Indeed, Upwork, LinkedIn. It's definitely a process. Like, be prepared for the volume. But, I just want to remind people, like, I've found some really great, roles through things like that. So, but I'm with you. My first kind of like success coach, so to speak, was definitely a rock star client that I had 3 years of social proof that she would be absolutely amazing. So, but again, on the other side of that, I have coaches that might say, oh man, like, this girl's awesome. She's been a client forever. She's going to kick ass as an assistant coach. And it's like, is that the easy way out, or is she actually going to kick ass for you? So I think it's just like doing your due diligence on that, because
And a lot of people don't have the difficult conversations of like planning. You almost have to ask, right? Like I was very intentional about asking, like, if you're going to want to do your own thing, this is not the place for you, right?
yep.
It's like setting expectations and having those boundaries, because otherwise you're both going to be upset. You're both going to end up in conflict. Like it's very important to establish and figuring out that person's personality and key drivers. So for some of the members of our team, they wanted to be involved with what we were doing, but they didn't necessarily want to have to solely build it on their own. So it's important to get into those conversations and say, hey, this is not designed for you to just learn every single thing that we do and then go do your own thing in a year or two. Like that's not, like, we're not doing that. So if that's the case, just wish them well, give them some resources, send them on their way, like let them build their network and just remain as friends and they go do their thing. But that's why I think, is the phrase like slow to hire, quick to fire? Is that the actual? Okay. Yeah. So I guess I was, even though I didn't really know any better at the time, for some of our core personnel and like key people who are rock stars now, I maybe was a little slower in that I had some conversation just about them as a person and like what they were looking for and needed. And then I could actually project like how our vision aligned with what it is. Like their vision could fit within the vision, right? Like what you want can exist here. And I can also make your life better in the short term, because as humans, like we need some gratification on that shorter term like time horizon, whether it's financial compensation or some time freedom or some wins up front. And so what I tried to do, especially for some of our core personnel, is like if they were in a job that they hated or they were short on time or they didn't have the work flexibility, it's like, how can I create those things within the role that I'm creating for you so that you're excited about this, and then like creating that traction right away. And then they're more aligned with the long-term vision, which is where then as the business owner and founder, like you reap rewards from them now contributing to that vision and project that you're working on.
Well, that's something too. Like, I mean, we could have an entirely different conversation on this, but so many business owners have zero vision. And I'm not asking you to have a 10-year game plan thought out, right? But when you bring people onto your team, you have to create and help them create a vision, right? Like that makes sense for their growth too. And so that's something that I do with all of my contractors, people on my team, is, they've all got kind of a game plan for how I see their growth, right, happening. So that's super important. I agree with you 1,000%. It's not just, okay, let me pay you this money and then I'll figure it out later, right? Like making sure that everything is, like you're operating like a business owner, right? And I think that we think that online business is like the wild, wild west, right? So people are running some wild shows out here, So I just think like the more you can do your due diligence and like really be an amazing manager, leader, all of that, like that takes skill. Question for you, just I'm thinking of this because I'm curious, honestly. People that come into FNMS, like you've got a ton of referrals, I'm sure. Would you say that like I guess what's the ratio of inbound to outbound? How do you sell it?
We're still a lot of inbound. Now I will say that over time, There's been things related to building brand and building audience where if you're doing a mix of organic and paid advertising, technically it's like, at what point is your messaging sort of outbound to where that is fueling the inbound, right? So we have a combination. I would say the majority of our FNMS students are podcast listeners. We do have referrals from students, which is great. Always love to have that sort of community. Like, it's a sort of full circle in the customer journey, right? The person comes in as a new person and then they eventually are bringing in someone else. There's been reasons and seasons for dialing back forms of outbound and also finding out the right mix of how that might work for us. And especially when people want to get into more conversations in a DM about like PCOS or something, right? It's not common for outbound folks to also be like your strongest like science-based team members, right? Usually those are people who would traditionally fall under the classification of a sales team. So I really have not leveraged outbound to the degree that people might expect, although we do our own version of it within communities that's more I think genuine to what we do and like authentic to what we do. So it's really more of, my job is to create the initial interest and captivation related to the program. And then once someone expresses that interest and maybe opts in for more information, members of our team will then communicate with those people. And it's very obvious that it's that, like, they'll say, hi, it's so-and-so. Like, it's not someone pretending to be me. But there'll be a team member who will introduce themselves. They'll see if they have any questions. They'll build rapport. They want to have conversation. And then you have the opportunity to learn more, ask any frequently asked questions. They'll send them videos and resources and different things, different customer stories or client journey stuff. So we're more of a hybrid where I do certain things in our marketing that's technically just brand building and also creating interest around things related to our offer. And then once someone raises their hand and is like, hey, I'd like a little bit, and it's not always like a direct call to action, but there are things that are peripherally related to our offer, then people are in our content ecosystem and will share things that are relevant to where they're at in their journey. So we also get a lot of coaches who maybe aren't ready for something like FNMS. So we'll send them, hey, here's a complimentary workshop, or here's a audio training, or here's a video series, or here's this checklist that's going to be great for you based on where you are. So we have people who are really more providing support in that process of like coming into our ecosystem versus very rarely, if ever, has there been a large volume of just outbound or cold outbound where it's like, we're just going to someone's page because they say that they're a coach. And then we're like, hey, how's it going? And then trying to, generate something from there. That's not really been a key driver, but it's kind of that, I'd say, hybrid. And my role has sort of shifted and evolved over time to try to support that enrollment. But we have it's a pretty good mix of current student referrals, I'd say podcast, nurturing via like email content, newsletter, website, my social media platform. And then we do have some advertising, but it's not a cold push to an offer. It's more content to nurture and support someone coming into our content to a greater depth. And then from there, opening up the conversation about ways we may be able to help them as a coach. So I find that that's more aligned with me personally, and also helps us to have better clients, like when they actually are ready and apply for FNMS.
Yeah. I mean, I always like to ask that question because you're not doing sales calls, right?
No, not at this
Yeah.
stage
Yeah.
of,
Correct. Yeah. I
I
mean,
stopped doing enrollment calls a while back. And that was an interesting transition, but that was one of the things that I waited to, we found support, like there was support within the organization and finding other team members in other areas before that was passed off, because
cool.
people were still like wanting to talk to me related to the offer.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's interesting to hear that, right? So are you consistently running paid ads for FNMS, or do you kind of ebb and flow with like pushes of ads?
So I lead with a lot of no cost content or free content or very, very inexpensive things that people can get their hands on that are related to what we teach. And then I try to create no cost or free content that's probably equally as good as some people's paid content, and just put out a large volume of that. I'm very consistent. I don't think I've missed a single podcast episode in, I mean, since I started the podcast, rain or shine, me feeling good, not feeling good, travel, no travel, have not
Retweet,
missed an episode.
Dan,
So yeah.
retweet.
So being consistent with the podcast is a huge tool for the brand. Um, but as far as that, just as far as advertising goes, what I think most people miss is they treat it like they're day trading stocks. And that is an incorrect way to approach building audience. It's really just an opportunity to give someone a digital handshake to potentially plant the seed of a long-term relationship. And you're looking at a much more delayed time horizon than most people would like to admit. Being consistent, just like showing up in your content creation and being consistent, if you are going to move into any type of paid advertising, my opinion is you should view it like your content creation. You're making little daily deposits that are going to compound over time that eventually build your audience to where you can build rapport and like a deeper relationship with people. And then if they know, like, and trust you, and you have compelling content related to your offer and marketing messaging and the appropriate avenues of bringing people into your circle, they'll convert and become a client. So I don't necessarily approach it as like, hey, you're brand new to my ecosystem, sign up for FNMS tomorrow. We don't really do that. You'll only really begin to see that if you've seen my free content for a period of time with very specific, like if this was in the marketing and sales world, a popular term is funnel. So if someone's at the top of your funnel, they're new, right? And this is air quotes. If you're listening on audio, this is my Dr. Evil air quotes, the funnel. So if someone's in your funnel, they're a little bit newer to your ecosystem, and ideally, in some capacity, they're moving towards you. Maybe they've given you their name, maybe they've given you their email, maybe they follow you on social media. Now, there are specific things you can do to then, is this audience that you're renting or audience that you're owning? So if Mark Zuckerberg is in charge of the platform, I don't own that content, that customer or that audience. They're not in my Rolodex. I like to use my very, very old parents as an example. If you were building business decades ago, you had a Rolodex, you'd write someone's phone number down, maybe their address, and maybe their fax number, because that was a thing before email. So coaches need to build their Rolodex. And so when you actually look at it from an audience acquisition perspective, most people post all this like top of funnel social media content and they don't bring people in any further. So most of what we're actually doing is just trying to get people to cross pollinate, to consume podcasts, consume newsletters, come into a community. I don't really do paid ads for that, but coming into a community, maybe sending them a valuable resource, sharing some videos with them, or bringing them into other stages, right? And it's really more of it, looking at it as like stages of conversion, as opposed to just, did they buy something or did they not buy something? So you make the consistent daily deposits largely to create brand awareness, build your Rolodex, and then over time, you share more valuable things that demonstrate your ability to solve that person's particular problem. And then if you have an offer, whether it's Taeler's offer or my offer, FNMS, the person's more likely to convert versus being what would be called in the marketing world like cold audience. So we do have paid traffic, but it's a little bit more strategic and more from the perspective of how can I build a relationship and build my Rolodex as a brand, to where most people listen to a lot of free stuff. And I'll even tell them, I'm like, if you haven't listened to the podcast, if you haven't downloaded like at least a dozen episodes, if you haven't consumed a workshop or follow me on Instagram, like you shouldn't, like, don't, like, come back later, like go like learn everything you can from that, because I've also just learned that those people are going to be better clients in the long haul. So I'm okay to do that, but it's very hard to shift out of that mindset, because most people get to that place, and if you're coming from a place of scarcity, you want that day trade. Oh, I spent $10 on Facebook, I need to get $100 back, or I'm expecting like $1,000 client package tomorrow. And that's not really how it works. I feel like you're sitting on a lot of ideas, thoughts, and comments.
Well,
So
you were
share
very
them.
long-winded, and I don't want to interrupt you because you have a lot of great things. But I'm like, damn, that and that and that. Don't forget it, Taeler, and that. But yeah, like one thing I want to hit on is volume, right? Like there's so much volume. So a lot of coaches that I work with think that paid advertisement is the end all be all. Like that's it. That's the golden ticket, right? And like I'm open with saying that I built a seven-figure business totally organically, like in the DMs, right? And I know people cringe at that and whatever, but I didn't do cold messages, but cold to close on average is 2 months. And that's on average. Doesn't mean there's not outliers, people that take a year or whatever. But, you mentioned ingesting podcast. You also mentioned holding your ground and not watering down your offer, or acting out of scarcity because somebody can pay you. I actually just wrote a caption the other day about how just because somebody can pay me to be in my mastermind doesn't mean I will let them in because they need FCA first or something like that, right? And so I'm the same way. Like my podcast does so much selling for me. My workshops do so much selling for me. So if you are, you know, putting out a new offer or even just struggling to sell your current offer, right? And you don't have lead magnets or a podcast or just something to get them introduced to your coaching style, going live more volume on the content front, right? Like I'm sure you can attest to this, but I give away so much shit for free.
Oh,
Like
for sure. Yeah.
so
I
much
knew as
shit.
soon as I was saying that, I was like, Taylor and I literally like we're posting all the time. And people need to consume and but part of it though is like I want to see if anyone's got some skin in the game. Like that shows me that you care, that you're learning, you're digesting things, you're taking your personal development into your own hands, which then allows me, I can take that person so much further than the person that expects me to do everything for them. Right. So it's like, if you have some skin in the game, I'll pull you, like, I will do everything I can to help you. If you're trying and you're doing your best, like I will meet your effort and like I will do everything I can to make sure you're successful. But if you haven't at least started a little bit on your own and done within what's in your locus of control, it's very, very hard to fully serve that person or help them, or for them even to feel as though you're fully helping them, even though you are, right? Because they haven't taken initiative on their own side to meet you, whether it's halfway or whatever arbitrary percentage you want to use. It just shows that people will take initiative and there's like deliberate intentional effort that they're exerting towards their growth, which I think is super important. So we use a combination of organic and pay and also Taeler, like we're very similar in the sense that I built FNMS mostly just organic and podcast, which is organic. So really Instagram, it was just a couple channels, Instagram, podcast, and some email, right? And a little bit of community
Yep.
dash of that sprinkled in as like your toppings. So those were kind of the core 3 to 4 things. And then you just have to look at, if you don't have your shit together, paid ads are just like a magnifying glass on your current brand and business. So you got to figure out your offer and your organic, because if you don't know what you're saying in your organic, or you don't know what you're teaching, or you can't provide value in organic, you're just, paid ads just magnifies the amount of eyeballs that are on there and the degree to which people are seeing you. It's like Taeler said, it's a volume thing. So just remembering, like, it's not the silver bullet. It's not the magic thing that's going to save your business. It's bringing more attention. You're basically taking your boat out into bigger waves in the ocean, and you need to make sure your boat can actually handle that, and that you have strategies to actually like nurture those people and still build relationship to a degree, which is why, I think we've both done certain things related to brand and marketing the way that we do. So I think we're actually pretty aligned and like very similar in that sense. I just view it as a way to enhance things and stay top of mind, right? Like we literally will spend money to just show people free stuff, just like how you give out free content all the time. Not only do we post free content all the time, not only do I post free podcasts all the time, but I will give out more free stuff on top of that, whether it's a checklist or video series or training, or like you said, your workshops. Those things are then magnified through advertising, right? To create a little bit of kind of that digital handshake effect, if you will. So that's kind of where I approach it. And then I allow my organic to then piggyback on top of that to create a degree of like additional presence. But I think people have the wrong mistake of like, if you're looking at ads as like a silver bullet for your business and you haven't actually addressed the core issues inside your business, you're really just potentially, and it's not fueling the fire in a good way, right? You're just bringing more attention and kind of magnifying some of the problems that may already exist.
Yes, ads do not cover up vague marketing, right? Not to mention, if you're avoiding the DMs and running the show by yourself, what are you going to do when leads increase, right? Eyeballs increase, right? It's a nightmare. So I'm curious to know like what FAQs you might have on like course build out in general or building that second offer.
In terms of what people may ask me in terms
Yeah,
of
what people have
FAQs,
asked you, commonly asked questions about courses. I mean, I've got a few, but I wanted to let you
I
lead.
think you did a really good job of like framing the episode with a kind of a strong foundation. And the important aspect that I don't want it to be overlooked is we both talked a lot about consumer behavior, market research, client conversations, and a little bit of due diligence. And a lot of times the questions that people have for me are really like they need to go ask those questions to their clients and their audience. So the FAQs are often like serving as a mirror to help them go do some work that they need to do in their own direction. Otherwise, I mean, aside from the consumer behavior aspect, I mean, maybe FAQs on like software. I think maybe it's not so much an FAQ as like a general sentiment, as people worry far too much about the software and passive income and pre-recorded modules, when really they should be focused on how can I use this as a tool or a vehicle to amplify the current transformation that I provide and potentially have the bandwidth to work with more people while still providing a very similar, if not greater value. All too often, the questions that I get from an FAQ perspective are like, oh, like where do I post my trainings, and should I do this or should I do that? And it's very they worry a lot about like tactics versus the big picture of being clear on the problem you're solving, who you're serving, and then delivering it in a way that really just reverse engineers your best transformations and providing some additional touch points. Or you could even look at a course as a way to just like provide more value to your current one-on-one clients. You know, a lot of people view courses as like this escape from your one-on-one coaching. Well, if you viewed it as a way to enhance the value you provide, or potentially like maybe there's a synergy there, or they can cross-pollinate to a degree, I think there's a lot of great options. But I would say the biggest FAQs are like people worry far too much about software, systems, things like that, and like they haven't even figured out. You're worried about where you're going to post the videos. You don't even know what you're teaching yet, or who you're helping, or do you even have interest in the offer to begin with, like the research stuff that we talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think I do get quite a few granular questions before anything ever happens, right? Like, how will I launch this? It's like, what the hell's the idea? But the number one question I get asked all the time, and it's really like a doubt thing, but how the hell am I going to sell something that's thousands of dollars when I'm already struggling to sell $400 a month coaching? That is the number one question that I get.
And it's a fair question. I think a lot of business comes back to like your scaling self-trust and self-belief. So if you are struggling a little bit with your current conversions, it's natural for that to come up. But that's why I think it's important. You know, we talk so much about consumer behavior and research and market research and client conversations today. It's like you need to figure out how to provide that equivalent of value, or how can you provide a transformation or an experience that someone truly wants to do, and viewing it less as like, well, you know, I need X amount of people, or will people actually pay that much? Or what we know in the industry around you, like people are already doing that, right? It's just, will they actually do it for your particular product? And largely what's going to determine that is, does this help save them some, you know, time, frustration, headaches, obstacles? Like, does it facilitate, or is there some degree of ease that happens because they're working with you? Is it because the community is going to provide these connections for them? You know, will people actually pay that much question is really more of a combination or reflection of your confidence and or self-doubt, combined with not spending enough time on like the meat and potatoes of the actual offer, because there are ways to cement the offer and really add valuable components. Like, the better question is, how can I make it a no-brainer, right? Or if I were to go through this, or if a client gave you $100,000, what is every single thing you would do for that person to give them like the best possible experience, right? So it's a little bit of like, just kind of flip it on its head. And there's other ways to ask that question, right? Like I've heard someone say it as like, okay, if this was your last customer and like your entire business relied on this, like how would you like serve that customer, right?
Brutal.
It's brutal, but it makes you
That's a brutal
think.
one. Yeah.
If you think from a different perspective, like a lot of it is the questions we're asking. So as business owners, if we can get out of that scarcity, will people actually pay that much? Well, it's like, what if they'll actually pay way more and you're not even thinking about it? You know,
Oh,
it's
yeah. Well,
so
I mean, you and I have both raised our rates multiple times, you know?
yeah.
I mean, yeah, of course.
But I will say though, but we only do that if I can figure out a way to actually provide a greater degree of value to where it's actually worth it, or we're injecting something into the experience that was not there before, or there's a demand issue where like I literally am having the problem of like, okay, we're having to actually manage the roster here as well. And it's also a degree, we know that when people make an investment or they pay more attention, they get a better transformation, they get a better result. And we've seen layers of coaching success that parallels some of the reinvestment that we've made in the program, as well as that. A lot of the increments in terms of the quote unquote price point or investment were related to adding live support, adding instructors, adding done for you resources, lengthening the amount of mentorship that you get or the amount of touch points that you get on a given week. So I think we have to, the word pay and price, it's like, yes, there's a financial exchange, there's currency, but this is really where I think like your money mindset is important, and looking at currency as there's like an energetic component to that, and just how people will pay for health and fitness coaching to achieve a result of fat loss or improving their health or energy levels or well-being. The same is true related to courses in business, but we have to figure out what the equivalent is, right? And a lot of times we don't spend enough time actually figuring that out. And try to flip your questions on their head, ask the opposite question, ask, some of those more challenging intellectual exercises to like force yourself into situations where you start to look at different dimensions from a customer's perspective, put yourself in different shoes, be in a different business for a second. Think about your most successful people, your least successful people. Okay, if someone is paying $400 for one-on-one coaching, what is working about that? Like, what is great about, why do people want to pay $400 for coaching versus $250 versus $500 versus like, you've got your winning recipe, and it's all about kind of, finding that and having different iterations of that. So the will people pay that much question, it's really like, yeah, I mean, there's people in the world who literally pay like millions of, like there was an auction, I forget where it was. There was an auction where someone literally paid like millions of dollars for like a specific license plate. So if people will pay that for a license plate, like you can't get someone to spend a couple $1,000s on something that may be a valuable, life-changing transformation tool for them. I think you can make it happen. I know Taylor thinks you can make it happen too. It's just kind of like shifting your perspective.
Well, it's messaging, right? I mean, similar to your auction thought process, I always say, like, if I told somebody I would give them $1 million if they gave me 25,000, like they would find a way to give me $25,000, right? Like, I think that people that are not investing, they're still investing in other things. And again, that goes back to messaging, which you and I could talk about a million different ways. But yeah, I mean, my whole goal of this podcast with you, right, was to just give kind of an overview of the course flow, the course structure, development, thinking of the idea, and just because a lot of my clients are really wanting to go that course route versus having a ton of assistant coaches and things like that, which I love a good course build out, obviously, because I do it. So I'm biased, but I know you do too. And that's become, because that's your only offer now, right? That's all you're selling.
It's definitely our like kind of main bread and butter sort of thing. To quote Remember the Titans, where Denzel says, "Split veer works like Novocaine, run it every time." We very much have, you gotta love Denzel and Remember the Titans. It's like very important part of my childhood. So it has been our main thing for a really long time. We do have some elements that tie into that or related to that or peripheral offers that may build off of it, but that is definitely what we're known for and something where we spend a lot of our time, attention, and resources.
Awesome. Cool. Sam, anything else? I'm going to link, obviously, how to get in touch with you in the show notes, but anything else I didn't cover?
No, I appreciated the conversation. I'm Sam Miller Science on every platform. Website is also sammillerscience.com. I will probably share some excerpts of this as well, because I feel like it was a super solid conversation with Taeler. That's pretty much it. And hopefully you guys learned something.
Go build a course.
This was loaded. This was loaded. Yeah, just I hope they were taking notes, because I feel like there's a lot. This would have saved me a lot of time. I don't know about you,
This
Taylor.
would have saved me a lot of time.
Saved me a lot of
Yes.
time.
A lot of
So you got
headache.
having that perspective.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Taylor.